Welcome to the Pencil Bob channel. I hope you enjoy my stories. Please like and subscribe, and hit that notification icon so you never miss out. Now on with the stories.
How I live in an HOA with zero oversight. The last time I heard from my HOA was over 3 years ago. But that doesn't mean the journey to peace was a quiet one. No, it started with a simple shed. All I wanted was a small structure in my backyard for storing lawn tools, maybe a few boxes. Nothing major. In my mind, I thought it was straightforward. My yard, my shed. And since it wasn't visible from anywhere but my own house, I figured it wouldn't be a big deal. But in an HOA, you can't just assume common sense applies. I remember the day I decided to build that shed like it was yesterday. It was a scorching summer afternoon, and I was struggling to fit all my gardening equipment into the cramped garage. Sweat dripping down my face, I muttered to myself, "That's it. I need a damn shed." So, being the rule-abiding type, I went ahead and asked for permission. I knew the HOA was picky, so I thought I'd make it easy for them. I presented 3 shed options, all pretty standard, prefab kits you could pick up at any home improvement store. All they had to do was pick one, and I'd be on my way to set it up. I waited anxiously for their response, checking my email every few hours. The anticipation was killing me. I'd refresh my inbox, then pace around the room, then check again. It was like waiting for college acceptance letters all over again, except this time it was about a shed. A shed? How had my life come to this? When it finally came, I was dumbfounded. I stared at my screen, blinking rapidly. Sure, I must be misreading it. Instead of a simple approval or even a polite rejection, they shot back. It has to be a tough shed. A tough shed? I said out loud to my empty living room. What the hell is a tough shed? My voice echoed off the walls, making me feel even more alone in my confusion. I ran my hands through my hair, trying to process this bizarre response. Was this some kind of joke? A test? Did they have some kind of exclusive deal with this tough shed company? I grabbed my laptop and started furiously Googling. Tough Shed, it turned out, was a real company. They made prefabricated sheds and garages. But why on earth would the HOA insist on this specific brand? Were they getting kickbacks? Was the HOA president's cousin the CEO of Tough Shed? The more I thought about it, the more frustrated I became. This wasn't just about a shed anymore. It was about principle. Who were they to dictate the exact brand of shed I could have in my own backyard? I felt my face growing hot with indignation. This was going to be a battle, I realized. A battle over a shed, of all things. But I was ready for it. If the HOA wanted a fight, they were going to get one. I looked up the prices, and my jaw nearly hit the floor. Tough sheds weren't exactly cheap, especially for a structure that was going to sit in my backyard and hold garden tools. But I decided to play along. I submitted a request for a moderately priced shed kit from Lowe's that looked decent and wouldn't break the bank. I figured maybe I'd find a compromise here. A week later, another email arrived. I held my breath as I clicked to open it, hoping against hope that they'd seen reason. Maybe they'd realized how ridiculous their demand was. Maybe they'd apologize for the confusion and give me the go-ahead for my original plan. My eyes scanned the message, and my heart sank. There it was again, that same infuriating line. It has to be a tough shed. But this time, they'd added more. Dear homeowner, we appreciate your interest in improving your property. However, we must insist that any shed constructed within our community be a Tough Shed brand structure. This requirement ensures uniformity and quality across all properties. We understand this may not have been your initial preference, but we assure you that Tough Sheds meet our stringent standards for durability and aesthetic appeal. We've attached a brochure with approved Tough Shed models for your convenience. Please submit your revised plan with a Tough Shed selection at your earliest convenience. Sincerely, HOA Board. I read the email 3 times, my frustration growing with each pass. The fake politeness, the condescending tone, the utter inflexibility. It all grated on my nerves. They hadn't even bothered to address any of the points I'd made in my previous email about cost or the other perfectly good options I'd proposed. I slumped back in my chair, feeling defeated and angry. This wasn't just about a shed anymore. It was about control, about the HOA flexing its muscles and showing who was boss. And apparently, in their minds, it certainly wasn't me. I glanced out my window at the spot where my shed should be, now just an empty patch of grass mocking me. This battle was far from over, I realized. In fact, it was just beginning. At this point, I was genuinely confused. I knew what I had seen around the neighborhood. And those sheds were definitely not all tough sheds. Some looked like they had been cobbled together with whatever wood and nails were lying around. If they were enforcing a rule, they were doing a lousy job of it. I decided to take a little tour around the neighborhood, camera in hand, and document the evidence. As I walked down the street, I couldn't help but feel like a spy on a covert mission. Every time I snapped a photo, I half expected someone to jump out and accuse me of being a troublemaker. "Hey, what you doing there, buddy?" A voice called out, nearly making me jump out of my skin. I turned to see my neighbor, Bob, eyeing me suspiciously from his driveway. "Oh, hey Bob," I said, trying to sound casual. "Just, taking some pictures for a project." Bob raised an eyebrow. "A project? Huh? Looks to me like you're casing the joint." I laughed nervously. No, nothing like that. It's about sheds, actually." "Sheds?" Bob's face lit up. "Well, why didn't you say so? Come on over, I'll show you mine. Built it myself, you know. The HOA's been on my case about it for years. But I just ignore him." As Bob proudly showed off his ramshackle shed, I couldn't help but feel a mix of amusement and frustration. Here was living proof that the HOA's tough shed only rule was complete nonsense. I spent a couple of hours driving and walking around, snapping photos of every shed I could see. Big ones, small ones, lean-tos, DIY monstrosities with peeling paint. I compiled my collection and attached it to a letter back to the HOA. In that letter, I asked a pointed question. Why am I being denied when others clearly have non-tough sheds? I sat at my computer, cursor hovering over the send button. Something didn't feel right. The HOA had been unreasonable, sure, but was this enough to make them back down? That's when an idea struck me. It was risky, maybe even a little underhanded, but I was tired of playing nice. I added a sentence that I knew would hit a nerve. "Is this because I'm the only Mexican on the block, and you're trying to drive me out of the neighborhood?" As soon as I hit send, a wave of anxiety washed over me. Had I gone too far? Would this backfire spectacularly? Now, here's the thing. I'm only half Mexican. If you looked at me, you'd probably never guess it. My skin's light, my last name's about as Anglo as it gets, and I don't have any obvious markers of my heritage. But the HOA didn't know that. To them, all they saw was a line in my email suggesting they were being discriminatory. It was a bit of a gamble, and part of me felt a little guilty for playing the card. But after months of back and forth nonsense over something as harmless as a shed, I figured I'd earned the right to take the gloves off. Days passed, and I found myself obsessively checking my email, waiting for the HOA's response. Would they apologize? Double down on their demands? Threaten legal action? But as the days turned into weeks, I realized something strange was happening. Silence. Absolute silence. The HOA, which had been breathing down my neck, nitpicking every detail, had nothing to say. No apology, no further demands, no acknowledgement whatsoever. And that's how it stayed. Days passed, then weeks, then months. I didn't get a single letter, not about the shed, not about anything. At first, I was elated. I had won. I could build my shed in peace. But as time went on, a nagging worry started to grow in the back of my mind. This wasn't normal. HOAs don't just go from obsessively micromanaging to ignoring someone. There had to be more to it. I started to feel paranoid. Every time I left my house, I found myself scanning the street for any sign of HOA activity. Was that car parked across the street watching me? Were my neighbors whispering about me behind my back? One day, I ran into Wanda, the HOA president, at the local grocery store. My heart raced as she approached me in the produce aisle. "Oh, hello there," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "How are you doing? We haven't heard from you in a while." I stammered, caught off guard. "I'm fine. Everything's fine. How about you?" She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, just peachy. You know, we've been making some changes in the HOA. Trying to be more inclusive. I do hope you've noticed." Before I could respond, she patted my arm and walked away, leaving me standing there, clutching a head of lettuce and feeling more confused than ever. Weeks turned into months, and still, nothing from the HOA. I finally built my shed. Not a tough shed, mind you, but a perfectly respectable structure that matched my house and didn't stick out like a sore thumb. Every day, I half expected to find a violation notice taped to my door, but it never came. The silence was almost worse than the constant nagging had been. At least before, I knew where I stood. Now, I felt like I was walking on eggshells, waiting for the other shoe to drop. My neighbors started to take notice too. I'd catch them giving my yard sideways glances, probably wondering why I was getting away with things they couldn't. Some of them even started to test the waters themselves, making small changes to their properties without asking for permission. One day, I overheard a conversation between two of my neighbors while I was working in my front yard. "Did you see what he did with his backyard?" One of them whispered. "How come the HOA isn't all over him about it?" The other neighbor shrugged. "I heard he threatened to sue them for discrimination or something." Now they're too scared to say anything to him. I pretended not to hear, but inside, I was a mix of emotions. Part of me felt guilty for potentially making things harder for my neighbors. Another part felt a sense of pride for standing up to the HOA's unreasonable demands. As the months turned into years, the silence from the HOA continued. I started to relax a bit, enjoying my newfound freedom. I painted my front door a bright, cheerful yellow, something that would have never been allowed before. I planted a vegetable garden in my front yard, another HOA no-no. Still, nothing. One day, I decided to attend an HOA meeting, just to see what was going on. As I walked into the community center, the room fell silent. All eyes turned to me, a mix of fear and curiosity on their faces. Wanda, the HOA president, cleared her throat. "Well, look who's decided to join us. Welcome. We were just discussing some changes to our policies." I took a seat, feeling the weight of everyone's stares. As the meeting progressed, I realized that the HOA had indeed been changing. They were less strict, more willing to compromise. And every time a contentious issue came up, Wanda would glance nervously in my direction. After the meeting, I approached Wanda. "Can we talk for a minute?" I asked. She nodded, looking like she'd rather be anywhere else. We stepped outside, and I took a deep breath. "Look," I said, "I know things got a bit heated with the whole shed situation. But I want you to know, I'm not trying to cause trouble. I just want to live in peace, like everyone else." Wanda's shoulders relaxed a bit. "We may have overreacted," she admitted. "The board has been discussing ways to be more flexible with our rules. Your situation made us realize we needed to change." I nodded, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. "I'm glad to hear that. And for what it's worth, I'm sorry for playing the race card. That wasn't fair of me." Wanda's eyes widened. "You mean, you're not?" I couldn't help but laugh. "I'm half Mexican, but you'd never know it to look at me. I shouldn't have used that against you, though." To my surprise, Wanda started laughing too. "Well, I'll be damned. You really had us going there. I guess we both learned something from this whole mess." As we parted ways, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. The war with the HOA was over, and while it hadn't been pretty, maybe some good had come out of it after all. Now, 3 years later, I still haven't heard a peep from the HOA about any violations. My shed stands proudly in my backyard, my yellow door brightens up the street, and my vegetable garden is the envy of the neighborhood. Sometimes, I catch sight of a neighbor giving my backyard a sideways glance, likely wondering why the HOA hadn't forced me to replace my non-compliant shed. Maybe they were used to seeing me quietly go along with things, but now that I'd taken a stand, they were at a loss for what to make of it. But you know what? I'm okay with that, because in the end, I learned that sometimes you have to stand up for what you believe in, even if it means bending the truth a little bit. And who knows, maybe my little act of rebellion made life a little better for everyone in the neighborhood. At the very least, it made for one hell of a story. C1. I cannot believe the audacity of this individual. Not only does he flagrantly disregard the established rules of his community, but he also resorts to deceit and manipulation to achieve his goals. His actions are a blatant disregard for the social contract we all implicitly agree to when living in a civilized society. The Homeowners Association, while perhaps overzealous in their shed requirements, exists to maintain property values and community standards. This person's selfish behavior undermines the very fabric of neighborly cooperation. Furthermore, his casual misuse of racial identity as a tool for personal gain is deeply problematic and offensive to those who genuinely face discrimination. This story is a testament to the erosion of personal responsibility and ethical conduct in our modern society. C2. HOAs are the worst. Like, who died and made them kings of the neighborhood? This story just proves how power-hungry and ridiculous they can be. Forcing someone to buy a specific brand of shed? That's some next-level control freak stuff. And then they have the nerve to ignore the guy when he calls them out on their BS. Typical. They can dish it out but can't take it. HOAs are just a bunch of busybodies with nothing better to do than make everyone else's lives miserable. If I ever buy a house, you can bet your ass it won't be in an HOA neighborhood. C3. These HOA people are nuts. Who gives a flying flip about what kind of shed someone has in their backyard? It's not like it's visible from the street or anything. And forcing people to buy a specific brand? That's some shady business right there. I bet someone on the board owns stock in Tough Shed or something. It's all about control and money with these HOAs. They don't care about the community, just their own little power trips. Good for this guy for standing up to them, even if he had to bend the truth a bit. Sometimes you gotta fight fire with fire, you know?
I would like to thank you for watching the video to the end. To encourage us to make more videos, please like, subscribe, comment, as well as share. Check out this other video if you haven't already.